Welcome to the New Jersey chapter, the American Scientific Affiliation, our first Zoom seminar of our own called the Crime Against Creation. So the ASA was founded in 1941. It is an international network of Christians. We all have some background in science. And so as scientists, we explore nature and its laws, but we are also Christians. So as Christians, it's not just how the universe was started and operated, but why it exists. So I'll just read the statement here. We believe that God is both the creator of our vast universe and the source of our ability to pursue knowledge. Also, that honest and open studies of both scripture and nature are mutually beneficial in developing a full understanding of human identity and our environment. So our core engagements, we engage in faith and science dialogue, discovery, the ideas and scholarships involved in science and faith. We support each other in our personal development and careers and calling, and sometimes support ourselves in our trials and tribulations as well, I might add. That's part of the fellowship and networking that we engage in here. We are 4,000 members strong worldwide. We take the idea of science fairly broadly, so the natural and social sciences, engineering, research, industry, medical fields, theologians, philosophy, etc. And again, all that are Christian. So it really is an organization that opens up dialogue, Christian dialogue among the sciences. There are 36 chapters across North America. 25 in the US and 11 in Canada, and 5 student chapters. Our meetings, frequently occasional meetings, we meet both quarterly, bi-monthly, twice a year, or annually. Our last 2 annual meetings were on Zoom. We're hopeful that our next annual meeting will actually be in person. But all local ASA members and individuals interested in the intersection of science and faith. We welcome tonight the Reverend Mitch Hescox, who's the President and CEO of the Evangelical Environmental Network. Let me say a couple words about him. First of all, we were really honored to have him. He's the President of the Evangelical Environmental Network. He guides a team representing perhaps 4 million pro-life Christians who understand that climate change is perhaps the greatest moral challenge of our time, and also the greatest opportunity, both for hope and building sustainable prosperity for all. The Evangelical Environmental Network is nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that equips, inspires, and mobilizes people of faith to worship God, love their neighbor by caring for creation. It's founded in 1993. EEN is the leading evangelical voice in the field of creation care advocacy and education. The Reverend Hescox has co-authored Caring for Creation, the Evangelical Guide to Climate Change and a Healthy Environment, a book I highly recommend. And he's done it with a nationally known meteorologist, Paul Douglas. He's contributed to several other books. He's testified before Congress, spoke at the White House, presented at the Vatican, the Council for Foreign Relations. He's appeared on CEN, NPR, PRI, MSNBC, BBC, and numerous radio programs, both Christian and secular. He serves as a member of the National Association of Evangelicals Board of Directors, EPA's Clean Air Act Advisory Committee, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection Citizen Advisory Council, the Board of Reference for the Center for Sustainable Climate Solution, and leads a small group at his local Pennsylvania church. Prior to joining EEN, Mitch pastored at a local church for 18 years. And before the call to ordained ministry, served the coal and utility industry as director, fuel systems for, I hope I get this right, LS Mineral Systems, New York, PA. He's married to Claire with 4 grown children and 7 grandchildren. So Mitch is a very, very powerful voice in the issues that we're going to be talking about, and we welcome him with open arms and are blessed and honored to have his presence here. Tonight, I'm going to start with a short video to sort of get our creative juices and understandings moving, called A Crime Against Creation. I'll pass it to Mitch for a response. I'll ask a sort of an opening question or be a brief dialogue with him, and then we'll open it up to the audience for you to partake of his wisdom and ask him questions that you've always wanted answers to. With that, Dana, you want to start the movie? I have to admit that when I saw this film, I thought almost immediately of Mitch and his background. Although in Pennsylvania and not in Kentucky or there, I think his temperament and his background can speak to this film well. So Mitch, I'm going to ask if you would share a little bit about yourself and your reactions to the film. And how I'll pass it over to you. Who are you? How does it affect you? And yeah.
Well, thanks. Really appreciate being here tonight, David, and all for attending tonight. I did grow up in Cambria County, Pennsylvania, and we didn't have mountaintop removal to the extremes that they have in West Virginia and Eastern Kentucky, where they take 500 feet off a mountain. But I grew up in places where they took 75 and 80 feet off of the top of a mountain to get to the coal seam. In fact, when I was growing up in the late 60s and early 70s, less than 50 yards from my back door was a non-reclaimed strip mine. My dads, my grandfathers, my uncles, my cousins all worked in the coal industry. And for 14 years after college, I worked in the coal industry. But what you saw in mountaintop removal is truly terrible. And I guess the only good news that I can say about it is with the demise of coal, hopefully the practice will soon start. And one of the things that I'd like to highlight about the arsenic that Matthew Sleeth was talking about there and the child was talking about, they have polluted over 1,500 miles of streams and rivers in West Virginia alone. And one of the things of those high concentrations of arsenic come from is that they take the waste from coal preparation plants where they clean out a lot of the garbage and use various heavy minerals to clean the coal. And they take the sludge, those tailings, and direct it right into those valleys and cover it up with the overburden from the mountaintop removal. It's literally a disgusting thing. There have been big pieces of cancer there. I mean, I certainly haven't done the work you saw, Alan Johnson there from Christians for the Mountains. Alan's a good friend of mine. He has dedicated his life to settling these problems and really caring for the people of West Virginia who have been impacted, not just for the earth, but for the people who lives have been ruined. They've been made ill, as I said, from cancers, respiratory illnesses, heavy metal poisonings. This is utterly a disaster. And it continues to be. But as I said, is that as I keep telling members of Congress and people here in Pennsylvania, that the good news is that coal is almost dead. The only coal that will be left to be mined in the United States within 10 years will be coal for metallurgical purposes, met coal, for coke. While it's still a bad thing to do it, there is a tremendous legacy of damage that is there. And I think to reflect upon it in some theological terms, I don't know if you have ever heard of or read the works of a British New Testament scholar by the name of Richard Bauckham. And Richard gave a paper at the Evangelical Theological Society meeting about 10 years ago up in Milwaukee. And one of the things that he highlighted upon was, the problem we always have from Genesis 1:28. What does dominion mean? How's the church screwed that up so bad? And it really is an interesting word because the word in Hebrew is radah. And it only happens about 11 or 12 times in the entire Bible. And most of the time, it refers to a king who is doing bad, a king who has not been a good shepherd with his people. And I believe very sincerely that the word radah is a command not to have dominion, but to shepherd the earth as God calls us to shepherd people and everyone else. But Richard has this really interesting idea, which I think falls in the same line of it. He calls it Baconian theology, named after Francis Bacon. And Francis Bacon, the height of the Enlightenment, one of the first people of scientific method, and also being a theologian. But he was the first person to read dominion, that word radah, as a task for the progressive exploitation of the earth. Basically, his view was with the creation of science that human beings know better than the creator. Then they can exploit things and take it over and control it. It reminds me sort of, for those of you who are old enough in the 60s, remember, better living through chemistry that DuPont used to talk about. And I think we found a lot that that's not a good idea anymore, is that while chemistry can be a very good treasure, it can also cause a lot of severe problems. And so I think that we want to look at that. And for myself, my expertise and my mission here in life now is we call it creation care as a matter of life. Because we believe very strongly that anything that you put into God's creation or destroy in creation can impact human life, but also the life of all people. I think we've all seen the hundreds of thousands of species that are becoming extinct. And there's an old line that it's kind of, I'm trying to think who said it. I used to have this debate with Catherine Hayhoe, if you know Catherine, famous client scientist, good friend. We used to argue who said it first. And they said that the earth will take care of itself, but it's people we have to worry about when it comes to climate change. But neither one of us said it first. And now I'm having an old person brain freeze, but the comic that had the words that you couldn't say on the radio or TV, help me out, somebody that's old enough to remember that. He actually said that a long time ago before Catherine or anybody, and he's certainly not a Christian. But it was kind of funny that I learned that when I was speaking to a bunch of moderate Republican or moderate Democrats a couple of years ago at their meeting, and a person called me out on it that neither one of us said it. But I think what this shows, and the movie shows going back to it, is that the church, both the evangelical church in recent years and the entire church through the past 500 years, has forgotten that God is the creator. And Genesis says he created it very good. And if God created it very good, then we need to respect that or honor that. One of my favorite chapters comes from Leviticus 25 when it's talking about the Jubilee year. And one of the verses is just lovely. It says that, remember that you are not owners of the earth, but merely tenants. Merely tenants. And, in a tenant, in today's term, you have a legal responsibility. That we have a contract with the earth, all of creation, to care for it, to treat it wisely. And I love that concept, because certainly, in Isaiah 24, Isaiah 24, it says human beings destroy the earth because they don't follow God's commandments. And I often tell people that, that the places where in the beginning of the Bible that really tells us how to care for the earth is not only in Genesis 1, but a lot of it's outlined in two of people's most favorite books in the entire Bible that I know every one of you read every day. Leviticus and Numbers. That's a joke for those who don't get it, but because nobody reads Leviticus and Numbers. But there it talks about crop rotation and animal husbandry, some of the really basics of sustainable living. And I think that's the things that we have to remember and teach people today, is this is God's earth foremost. And people don't realize the negative impacts on human life from things like mountaintop removal, pouring that arsenic into the river valleys. I'm not familiar, most of you have had the scientific background. You probably know what PM 2.5 is, small pieces of dust, 2.5 microns or smaller. It kills anywhere from, being what study you want to believe, from 120 to 200,000 people in the United States every year. 1 in 9 women give premature birth in the United States just because of PM 2.5. And what's even more terrifying is that in the Black community, that number almost doubles to 1 in 5 women. Where is the major source of PM 2.5? 98% of it is the combustion of fossil fuels, whether it's from the burning of diesel, gasoline, coal, and certainly some of it now, especially in the Western United States, is coming from the burning of our forests due to climate change. So that's my initial reflections. And I mean, as I warned David that I'm an evangelical preacher and I could preach all night, but I would love just to hear some of your comments or maybe do some more reflection of how we could work together and all that's before us and all that we can do. So David, I hope that's a good first answer, a rather long answer to your question.
I think you did a wonderful job. I'll make one quick comment when they were talking about evangelicals being late, and I come to mind is Paul Santometer's work back in the early 70s. And I think some of, we've turned this into a political thing.
Absolutely.
And in the beginning, it wasn't. I mean, people from all faiths and all denominations worked on it. I mean, we weren't in the majority by any means, but there was a common cause of it. So
yeah, and I would recall, Francis Schaeffer's response to the white papers on how Christianity was to blame for the environmental crisis. It's still a seminal book. If you've never read it, I mean, you have to like the King James Bible. But Francis Schaeffer, back in 1970 or 71, gave a series of lectures at Wheaton College on Christianity and the environment. And it's a beautifully written book. Again, it's all male pronouns for those who have not a little taking it today. He wouldn't pass the scientific writing skills today, but it was turned into a book called Creation and the Pollution and the Death of Man. And if you've never read it, I basically make all of my new staff read it as a sort of foundational reading of sort of the ground level theology of creation care. And even Billy Graham in later life really took up the mantle of creation care. I wish we could get his son to do the same. But, Billy Graham came to understand that we're to care for God's creation because it's owned by God and it kills people, and very firmly. And I think you're right. It's become political, even more so today. And, just as unfortunately in my evangelical world, so many things that shouldn't be political are political. And I could say a lot, but I probably shouldn't. But I think that the idea is that, I'm a Christian first. I mean, I believe in following Jesus first. I mean, I am a lifetime Republican. In fact, just wrote an op-ed in Pennsylvania about that. But I don't know what the Republican Party is anymore because it's certainly not conservative. It's a populist party. And I think that, we need to re-entrench this roots of biblical belief. And I just read somewhere that only somewhere about less than 5% of people who call themselves Christian actually have a Christian worldview in the United States today. They don't practice what the Bible says in the church. They sort of have seen Christianity as their populist version to take and leave and go to church instead of working on building the kingdom of God. So I think that's one of my missions in life, is to help people see that we're called to build that kingdom of God, to care for people, to love one another. And I think that's what we have to do very strongly and very wonderfully in today's age. And one of the things that I will just, before I know that David's heard this story before because he's heard me speak before.
I did.
But one of the things that I love to talk about is there are so many young people today that are turned off by the church. They're turned off by some of the stances, the old line that people know more about what we're against than what we're for is true. And this hasn't happened for a couple of years because of COVID, but I can tell you, I've been now president of EEN for almost 13 years. And up until the past 2 years, there haven't been a time, maybe at least 10 people every year that's sitting on a certain airline that doesn't have seat assignments, a young person will end up sitting beside me. And I'll be either have my Bible or by reading about creation care or a scientific paper on human health and pollution. And the younger person more often will turn to me and say, what are you reading and what do you do? And I say, I'm an evangelical environmentalist. And the number one response, 90%, is, what the hell are you talking about? And then I open up the Bible and explain to them where God says to care for his creation. And I have led people to an initial encounter and relationship with Jesus, at 35,000 feet, 60 or 70 times in my life at EEN. And there's a passion and a yearning for a true spirituality, a true Christianity, about grace and love and about caring for all people. And I think it's the time the church has to do it. I personally, as a pastor for 20 years, I believe this is the make or break time for the church in America. We're going to stand up and represent Jesus, or we're going to dwindle away, and a next generation will have to come back and bring us up again.
So with that, why don't we open it up to the rest of you for questions and comments?
This is David Yee here. I want to thank you very much, Mitch, for your talk tonight. I think it's certainly, from my point of view, it's a message that deserves a wider audience. One thing that you said struck me, especially David's point in that this issue has become very politicized. You mentioned that you have had an opportunity to talk to moderate Democrats about this situation. I was wondering whether you've had an opportunity to talk to moderate Republicans and what their response has been to you.
Yeah, I spend most of my time when I do my work, whether it's in Washington, D.C. or in another state capital, working with Republicans. And there are quite a few Republicans starting to turn around. Probably the leader in the Senate right now is Senator Braun from Indiana. While he's not completely there yet, he's done some really good things for climate and been a super stuff. Pennsylvania Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick is probably the leader of the Problem Solutions Caucus from the Republican side in the House. Another good guy who really gets it. And so if you know any friends in Bucks County, just right across the river from New Jersey, he's a really good guy and really appreciated. They're coming along very seriously. And I think more are, and many are. In fact, I met right before COVID broke out, I met with 9 Republican senators in a particular senator's office for coffee one morning. And they all know that climate change is real. They all know that they have to do something. What we have to do is convince them that it's economically in their interest and their constituents to move away from fossil fuels. Like, for example, as of 3 weeks ago, there are now only 4 operating coal-fired power plants in the state of Pennsylvania. 10 years ago, there were 24. Is that the environment that's doing it? No. Natural gas has knocked their socks off and they can't compete. The cheapest forms of generating, if you want some really good economic arguments, have you ever heard of Lazard, L-A-Z-A-A-R-D? They're a big economics and accounting firm in New York City. And usually every November or later in October, they come out with the levelized cost of energy. And like 4 years ago, they listed that utility-sized wind power is the cheapest way to generate electricity, bar none. Utility-sized solar is second. And they believe by 2023 that even with battery backup, those will still hold true. And we have to keep those. But, emotional reactions are tough from people, especially when it comes to the fear of losing their jobs. I mean, I grew up And I guess one of the things that I always tell people, the town that I grew up in, Cambria County, Pennsylvania, was bituminous country, not real deep coal. But really, by the end of the 60s, the coal mines were all gone. They were too expensive to compete with the Wyoming coal. Literally, half of my family got laid off and really never found work again in the coal industry. Some were lucky to find work at all. And coming up with some kind of two things of just transition for energy workers and also working for environmental justice from those people who've been forced to live in red line areas or buy power plants or chemical plants because of their economic status. There are two areas of our country that we as Christians have to bring up simultaneously and care for. And one of the biggest things I fight for admittedly in Washington every day is that one of those voices doesn't beat out the other, because there are people from the environmental justice community that say, look, we've never been treated fairly. We live in pollution, and they're absolutely right, they do. But you also look at a guy who's right now pushing a barge of coal on the Monongahela River in western Pennsylvania, who makes $70,000 a year, and he's not going to be able to live in his household putting, insulation in for $12 an hour. And so we have to come up with the solutions to do it. And I think that's one of the things that the church has to see. If we put it in people terms, one of the things I learned a long time ago, and I'll tell the whole story, but when I first came to EEN, our number one message in talking about climate change was the impact on those folks in the majority world. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts that they will suffer the most because of climate change, and they did the least to deserve it, the least to cause it. But when I came to EEN, I started traveling around the country, preaching, talking in Christian colleges, or any place I could get an audience. And that fell on deaf ears. People were not interested in changing their lifestyle for somebody that lived in Africa or Guatemala, or we're running out of water in the mountains of Peru and we're going to get charged exorbitant rates because they privatized all the water in Peru. But I did find out something that I could reach them with. And that's when I started talking about things like how mercury, back in those days before the MATS and air toxic standard were there, 1 in 6 babies were born with brain damage in the United States from mercury coming out of coal-fired power plants. And it's really interesting when you can demonstrate to people that things like asthma and autism and ADHD all have direct links to petrochemicals and fossil fuels. They start paying attention. And it's really common sense that people start to get worried when it impacts something that's dear to them. And when you can talk about them in that way, about their kids or their grandchildren, they get very interested. Again, I have to tell most of my these things are pre-COVID, because I have not been out speaking in person since COVID very much. But right before the COVID, I did a thing down at a Southern Baptist church down in Montgomery, Alabama. And obviously, the President Trump was still there, and there was a bunch of kids from a Christian college there, probably about 50 or 60 people. But this older woman showed up, and excuse me for being stereotyped, but she was a stereotypical Southern older woman. Silver blonde hair, completely in a great big perm, and with big earrings on, and carrying lots of gold around her neck. And she was dressed all in red, and she had this red jacket that must have literally had 100 Trump pins on it. And I just said, oh my goodness, what's going to happen here tonight? And so I did my spiel, and you've heard a little bit of it, and talked about what these impacts. And I literally walked up to her afterwards and said, ma'am, I am really surprised you're here tonight, because, you're obviously a supporter of President Trump. And, he said that climate change is, a big hoax. The Chinese caused it. And she looked at me with the sweetest eyes and opened up her mouth and said, I'll bet nobody's ever talked to President Trump about climate change the way you did. And if you would go to talk to him directly, you could probably change his mind. I don't think I had that much credit, or never would. But it was just an interesting fact that it's so true. And when you talk to people, Here's how I talk to people, and it's very simple. You need a way to talk to people to get them to change their behavior by reaching their heart first. And that's why I talk about the children and their grandchildren here in the United States first, and then we can talk about the needs in the developing world. Second, and especially for evangelical church, you have to back it up with scripture. It's absolutely that whatever you say that will tag their heart, you have to confirm it with scripture. Then I answer general questions about the science if I need to. But more importantly, I give them something that they can do. I can tell them about how their churches can plant community gardens and help people to get healthy food. How they can put energy efficiency in their church building and at least save, just with a little bit of insulation and some weather strippings, they can probably save 7 or 8% of their utility bill. And then I talk to them how they can change their own lives about driving a hybrid car or going to all electric, because it's coming. I mean, when Ford makes an F-150 that's all electric, things are happening. You saw the big news, a couple of days ago about the Ford South Korean company. They're going to build this great big battery plant in Tennessee. The change is coming. We just have to decide if it's going to be a transition that we can make soon enough to avoid the worst of climate change, or we're going to suffer through it. And the time is now that we have to do something in the next, certainly by 2035, we have to be close to net zero in this country to really make a difference. So that was another, I'm good at giving long answers, so feel free to interrupt me and ask me any other questions.
Mitch, thank you for everything you've been saying. I have a group of Christian friends, and they've sort of gone in the other direction, saying we've messed things up so badly at this point that there's no return. We should just give up. What's your response to that?
My first question is very biblical. Jesus said we could do greater things than he could. So there's always hope. And there is hope. And the statement that David read earlier is one of my core beliefs, is that climate change is the greatest moral challenge of our time. But it's also the greatest opportunity for building a hopeful, clean, sustainable world. We are not out of time yet, but we are approaching that. And we don't want people to lose hope, but we want people to get smart and act. We want people to put solar panels up on their house if that works for them. I don't have solar panels in my house because my wife and I 15 years ago intentionally bought a house that was built in 1893 that I am constantly working on, believe me. But I don't want to put solar panels on it. One is we don't have really good sun angles on our house, but Pennsylvania has this great thing called Pennsylvania Switch. So I buy 100% of my energy for wind sources. And it's cheaper than me putting the solar panels up. So why not do it? So find a thing that works for you. I mean, we both drive hybrid cars. Why do we drive hybrid cars right now? Because we don't have a garage in our old in-town house. And the closest charging station is 22 miles in one direction and 14 miles in the other. So I've chosen for right now, until we maybe downgrade in a few years, of driving hybrids. And I get 41 miles to gallon, which isn't too bad. But you can do those things and be smart about your operating, but we have to act now. All of our appliances are high efficiency. All of our light bulbs are LED. We have hope, and we have to cling to that. And my hope is in Christ, that Jesus makes all things new. But we have to act. We can't follow. We cannot refuse and give up and just melt away, or we can't refuse to just live the same, because it requires change. Dana just brought up the Hope Young Evangelicals for Climate Action. That's actually part of EEN. They're a ministry of us that my good friend and former colleague Jim Ball actually created the idea about 8 years ago. I give him credit for getting a bunch of young folks together in Washington, D.C. And it's kind of fun because they're on their 4th national spokesperson now. Ben Lowe was the first one, and he went back to college to get his PhD. We had an interim one who was there for a year, Rachel, and Rachel then left to get her PhD. And Kyle Minor Chop, who was it for 5 years, is now too old to be it. And he's now my vice president at EEN. And my former communication director at EEN, Tori Goebbels, is now the head, leads YCA. And if you're really interested in something, go to their website. With the help, they will be sponsoring climate vigils all around the country during COP. In fact, one of the things also, if you want to make a donation, YCA and a bunch of other Christian groups, they are recording it right now, a CD of Christian worship all dedicated to creation care. And it will be the first time that's ever been done by leading Christian artists to actually make a whole disc, a whole album, in my terms of being an old fogey, of Christian worship songs for creation care. And I think it's marvelous. They're doing great things, absolutely great things. And I can't remember her name, and I should. It's late at night for me after working all day. But last year during the elections, Fox had 3 young people on to talk about their faith in the elections. And one of the folks from YECA, one of their champions, a young woman, got on. And she did dynamic, standing up, the climate change is real, that these are my values. And being on Fox News, it was on whatever the Fox News show it's on at 8 Joe and something in the morning show, but did a great job. And I'm just so proud of them for doing it. And and they also give me a lot of hope because they are committed. They are very committed to seeing it changed. So there's lots of reasons for hope, and I would tell people that faith gives you hope. And for those that say the world is ending, I'd say I always turn to the fact you go to you show me in the Bible where Jesus says there's a date that he knows the world is going to end, and then I might believe you. But of course, he says he never knows the time when it's going to come in. And if you believe, some people have different theologies in that, but the literal biblical end of the earth is that heaven comes to earth and it's recreated. I mean, Revelation 21 says heaven comes to earth. And I think it's just a beautiful thought that, I don't know if you've ever read N.T. Wright or not. He's sort of my favorite theologian today. And I love his expression, that there is life after death, and there is life after that. And that's the second coming of Jesus in the union of heaven and earth. In fact, one thing that I never knew until I preached about it early this year in my home church is that in John 12, when it talks about the King James said many mansions, that word actually, if you look at the origins of the word in Greek, it refers to like sort of an inn, a transitional place in the journey, a place to stay when you're in the middle of the journey. And I love that because it says that our first life after death is just a little resting place until we get to the culmination of heaven and earth coming together, which I think is pretty cool.
So Mitch, by trade, I'm a viral immunologist and a professor, and I study human viruses. So obviously my lab is switched to a lot of our work is now COVID related, but I'm very disheartened by just the anti-science attitude of much of the evangelical church. If it's, that there's real ignorance and not understanding of science and that facts and opinions are different things.
Me too.
And I see the same thing. I see the same thing in the whole climate arena that there's just this denialism, and if there is any acknowledgement, it's like, well, it doesn't really matter because God's never going to let us destroy the earth. He'll come back, which I think is incredible arrogance.
Yep, it certainly is. I would completely agree with you. As I like to say, when people quote that to me, I said, there's that little passage in Jesus' little trip to the wilderness where it says, don't tempt the Lord thy God. Mm-hmm. And I would remember that, we're not supposed to tempt God. We're supposed to take care of his creation. Mm-hmm. But, I have I still preach. My church has open worship now, and I have friends who are pastors, and I preached 4 times in the past 2 months, and I have included very strong messages on getting vaccinated at every place I go, because it's stupid not to get vaccinated. I mean, absolutely stupid. I mean, I lined up when I was a little kid on the gym floors to get the polio vaccine when I was, back in the late 50s and early 60s.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
And,
that's good.
and this idea, I'll just share my own thoughts. The idea of this impinging upon my freedom is so much BS. And that's the people's arguments about it. And, but the way I try to overcome it, I mean, I could really attack them and that doesn't do any good. But my favorite tactic lately is I said, does anybody remember the old slogan of, 30, 35 years ago, what would Jesus do? And they said, yeah. And I said, well, when it comes to vaccination, would Jesus care about kids and young adults and the elderly who are really susceptible to this disease? How would Jesus care about that? Would he maybe get vaccinated so he couldn't do it? And it doesn't work all the time, but I'm loath that the soft sell is a lot better than trying to tell them that they're a bunch of nincompoops and idiots, because that never works.
Yeah, that doesn't work very well. You're right.
So that's what I tried. And some people we've gotten it. And I think one of my small group members at my local church is a physician. And another one is an emergency room nurse. And they both came up and wanted to hug me after I preached out of my own local church because they're overwhelmed. I mean, in York County, 92% of the people that are in the hospitals as of last week were unvaccinated with COVID, and the hospitals are filled again, and it's just shouldn't be. Shouldn't be. I agree.
Extreme situations with the science denials, but there are those that are more middle of the road. And I always view that as the audience to reach out to. And at the national level, has there been much conversation about bringing citizen science into churches? I've spent my career working with citizen science, and I see it as a real way of building trust in science, is having people actually involved in the process.
Yeah, I think there has been some, and the best one I know about is the AAAS Dozier program.
Yeah.
I actually spoke with they were a big capstone thing. They had actually contracted the National Association of Evangelicals to do a bunch of science and faith roundtables a few years ago, and then they capped it off with a big meeting in Washington. And Catherine Hayhoe and I did the climate change thing. But one of the things I'd invite you to even talk about, and maybe we should get her involved in AFS. My new director of science and policy came on board a year and a half ago, actually has her PhD in climate science. And she actually a paleoclimatology. She worked for the Smithsonian. Her last gig was at the Department of Energy as a fellow before I stole her away from there. But she also co-pastors a church with her husband, a very evangelical church in Washington, D.C. But you're right. I mean, and getting Francis Collins to speak. I mean, Francis is a great guy when it comes to talking about faith and science. He really honored me. I mean, and what's good too is that BioLogos is now taking on creation care and climate. We just had a conference over the weekend. It was virtual on creation care. It was supposed to be in person, but they canceled it. But their first meeting on creation care and climate was down in Baltimore, I guess 4 years ago. And they asked EN if we would come and display there. And I can tell you that, without any thing, as Francis Collins is one of my heroes. And he came walking over the table and saw my book. And I said, would you like to have one? And he said, absolutely. And they took it and looked at it and turned around and said, would you sign it for me? And when your hero asked you to sign his book to him, I about fell off the chair and fainted. I'll admit it. It was pretty cool.
One of the things I thought I'd pick up on also, too, in my experience, is that while I agree that browbeating people and convincing them that they're ignorant just doesn't work, one of the things that I've noticed really is that then evangelical Christians are the community with the greatest fear I've ever met. That seems to be a concern. And so, for example, when you talk about conservatism and populism, quite often the big barrier you have to go get over with is that if you go ahead and tell people that they should be in Christ, this then is essential because so many people are so afraid of things not being the way that things were, that everything we propose, vaccination, anything else, it seems that you have to get over this fear that people have. At least that's been in my experience, talking about science and faith, talking about the environment. It's fear. And so that's the one thing that I think, at least from my experience, is the biggest hurdle.
I would agree it's one of the major hurdles of doing it. In fact, David could tell you in my book, the second chapter I wrote is Fear Not.
Yeah.
And I believe that this time in America, whether it's on science, climate change, or even the vaccines, really equates to, the Israelites wandering through the desert. And every time they got challenged, they wanted to go back because they knew how they would die in Egypt. And you're right. And so we have to overcome that fear with Christ and hope and look for a new world. And I think that applies to vaccines. I think it applies to climate. One of the stories I often tell is that in the midst of transitions, and it gets people thinking a lot, around 1900 in America, the top three industries were railroads, farming, and anybody want to guess what the third one was? Horses. And so when the gasoline engine and the automobile started taking place, you should look at the papers of the wars that happened about changing streetcars out and electrifying them, or having cars coming down New York City, of what they were going to do. The furor, which actually now would make a lot of sense, of putting, gas stations up in the middle of highways so you can supply cars. I mean, it was really an interesting cultural war then because of fear of change. And we're always going to have change, and we have to work change to our benefit. And that's what I try to tell people, to give them those examples of, where it's been before. I live in this little town of New Freedom, which is now basically a bedroom community for Baltimore. 4 miles up the road is a little once village called Hametown. And I think there's 5 houses left in Hametown. Does anybody know what a hame is? That's the collar you put around a horse that it pulls a buggy. The town was named for an industry that no longer exists, because only in racing horses and the Amish use hames anymore. And I think you saw that. So, I think you're right. We have lots of challenges, and I don't have all the answers, but we have to keep trying together. And that's, I think, the very good message that we have to have. And David says he has to leave pretty soon, and I wouldn't mind leaving and having some time with my wife the night before I go to bed. So, but please, you have my email address. Please email me. I'll be happy to stay in touch with you. Would love to stay in communication anytime you have more people that you'd like to talk to and have a dialogue on science and faith. I'd love to be there with you. So just, whatever I can do to be supportive of your group, and then we can carry this message around, it would be absolutely wonderful.
Mitch, I want to give you my personal thanks for being here. You've been a real blessing to this group, and bringing your expertise has been wonderful. So I have to take off so my wife can lead a retreat. So I hope the rest of you can stay along and have a conversation. It'd be great. Okay.
I'll be happy to stay. I'll be happy to stay a couple more minutes, but then I'd like to go too. So
Do we have a link?
thank you, David, for inviting me.
Do we have a link for your book?
You can go to our website and there's a link for it. Go to Amazon and buy it. You can buy it there for a couple bucks. It's real easy. The Caring for Creation, the Evangelical's Guide to Climate Change and a Healthy Environment. And wrote it with Paul Douglas, who's a really neat weatherman from the Twin Cities area. One of the best things about Paul is his real name is Doug Krohofer. So when he went on TV, they made him change his name. So he's now Paul Douglas. But he grew up in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. So he's a Pennsylvania Dutch person. His dad still lives there. But I have to tell you, he's my good friend. And one of the best things about Paul Douglas is that he is a Penn State alumni and a big supporter and has season tickets to Penn State football games. So I usually get to go to a football game or two on him every year, and I'm very appreciative of that. So,
Yeah, if I could just make a quick follow-up comment. I
Sure.
think one of the big challenges is that it's so easy to sell fear. I mean, that's the heart of I like your contrast between conservatism and populism, because you could pick anything, and that's an easy way of convincing a lot of people. And so I think that this is more a comment to then say we shouldn't be discouraged. We know what we're working against, and just keep on, keeping up the good fight, as you point out, in a caring and loving way, and not to be discouraged about how easy the message is that's going against what we stand for.
Well, and I really agree with that. And I think one of the things that's really going to make the difference are the companies like Ford and GM and others who are turning to all electric. To some of the companies now, I quite honestly, I don't quite believe yet what ExxonMobil says about what their carbon future is going to be. I think they've still told enough lies of putting fear in people and the Koch brothers. But I think just the cost of doing business, seeing the advantages of seeing renewable energy fall so much, and I also think from one of my points of view is that one of the great things about renewable energy is it doesn't have to be centralized. Imagine what we can do in the majority world, in the developing world, by having, every small town have their own renewable energy system. We can light up the life and educate people and have vaccines and do miracles that you could never do by having a central generating station and running, hundreds and thousands of miles of transmission lines. I argue in the book that nobody in Africa would ever be able to afford putting a central generating station and running cables up. You just can't do it. And I think that with renewables, we can do that. In fact, one of the neat things, and this is going back 4 or 5 years now, but Google actually bought this from the DOE. They bought this, not quite, but almost a perpetual motion machine, which would run, it was basically like a kite with a tether on it. And it had a solar charging cell in it, and it also had a wind turbine on it. And its chief purpose was to get internet signals from satellites down into remote villages. I mean, the technology is there and it's going to happen. And you folks are responsible for a lot of that. And I think, telling those good success stories are the way to go and how to do it. How about 1 or 2 more questions, and then I'm going to call it a night if that's okay with you folks.
I think one of the important questions you brought up is there are possible fixes to a lot of these problems. There's changes in behavior that we can do, but are we willing to do this on a timeline that protects us from, say, the worst aspects of environmental damage?
That's my prayer, and that's what I work for. And I'm not going to give up hope that it's possible to do that. But we have a lot of work to do, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I mean, that's one of the reasons that, from my perspective, even though I am a lifelong Republican, we need to have both the bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed the Senate and this somewhat reconciliation package, because what the argument that I'm using with members on both sides, conservatives and Republicans, 1 in 3 Americans this year experienced an extreme weather event.
Including New Jersey.
Including New Jersey, including even Pennsylvania. We got some of the same storm where I live. I was out west at the time, so I missed it. But the answer is that just look at the economic cost of all the extreme weather, not to mention just the sea level rise by itself. The cost of dealing with the consequences of climate change, even for the United States, far outweigh the cost of turning to clean energy right now. And people who have that argument need to make that argument and repeat that argument. I mean, it's like the old Fram commercial, auto commercial for the filter. You can pay me now or you can pay me later. And we're almost at the point where we're just going to be in that pay me later time. but we still have an opportunity to change, but we have to do it quickly.
Absolutely. I'd like to thank you very much for taking time to meet with us this evening. And I'm thinking, hopefully in the future, we might get you up to New Jersey, because I think you have an important message.
Hey, it's not that far to go to New Jersey. So, you know, I live, depends on where you want me to be. I live, you know, we have to. My son actually went to, I said, not to school in New Jersey, a little once upon Christian school up in northern New Jersey, Bloomfield
Drew?
College.
Drew?
No, Bloomfield College.
Oh, I didn't know that was a.
Yeah, Bloomfield, it was a very interesting place because and my son chose it for a reason, which I'm very proud of him on. 80-some% of the students are people of color, and 90% of the people, this is the first time anyone in their family ever went to a college. And him growing up in pretty much an all-white area wanted to grow up and go to a college where he could meet, grow, and learn to be a diverse person. And that's why he went there.
Wow.
So, but folks, thank you so very, very much. Please call me, email me, let me know what I can do to help, and I will be available to do that. Or if I'm not, one of my team is, because I have a bunch of sharp people who are way smarter than me and my team these days. So it's great to have them here. So thank you so much, and God bless all of you.
Thank you, Mitch.
Bye-bye.